Articulators. Exercise 3.1. Produce the words May and December and focus on the initial sound in each word. Think about which parts of your mouth move when you make each sound. Be careful to focus only on the m and the d. You will just make it hard for yourself if you try to focus on the whole word at this stage. Which word, which part of the mouth can you feel moving? Are the parts of the mouth that are moving the same for m and d or different? Tip: for the exercise, it may help you to use a mirror or to work with a friend so that you can look at each other while you produce sounds. Comment: you will probably have noticed that the lips move for m and that the tip of the tongue move for the. In the previous unit, we saw that the vocal tract refers to all the passageways above the larynx through which air can flow when we produce speech. An articulator is the name given to a part of the vocal tract that can be used to form a constriction when we describe consonant production and place of articulation. In phonetics, we think about the place of the vocal tract where there is maximum constriction to airflow. There are always two articulators involved in making the maximum constriction. For m, the articulators are the two lips. For the articulators are the tip of the tongue and the roof of the mouth. The articulators themselves are named using a special set of terminology. As in most disciplines, we use special names for things that we need to talk about often and with a degree of precision. Figure 3.1 shows the vocal tract in more detail. The name of the articulators are shown in bold: alveolar ridge, hard palate, velum, uvula, pharynx, glottis, upper lip, upper teeth, lower lip, lower teeth, tip, blade, front, back, tongue. These are the articulators. Many of the articulators will be familiar to you. For examples, the lips and the teeth are parts of our anatomy that we are all familiar with. Some of the other names may be less familiar. The alveolar ridge, for example, is not a term most people come across before they study phonetics. However, the alveolar ridge can be identified easily as the prominent ridge or hard bone behind the upper teeth, which you can feel with your tongue. The palate is the hard, bony surface further back than the alveolar ridge, and the velum is the soft palate, which is even further back in the mouth. The uvula is the piece of flesh that hangs down from the back of the velum and can be seen if you open your mouth and look in the mirror. We have already met the vocal folds in the previous unit. They can vibrate to produce voicing, as we have seen, or they can be used to restrict the airflow and act as a place of articulation. The space between the vocal folds is called the glottis. The tongue is also an articulator and is involved in the production of the majority of the sounds present in English and other languages. However, in order to be precise when we talk about articulation, we need to label parts of the tongue separately. The tip, blade, front and back of the tongue can be labeled individually. You will note that there are also names for the cavities of the vocal tract, namely the oral cavity and the nasal cavity. These two are joined together and joined to the space above the larynx by another space called the pharynx at the back of the mouth. Exercise 3.2. Look in the mirror and try to identify the articulators shown in figure 3.1, which can and cannot be seen in the mirror. Use your tongue to feel the articulators along the upper surface of the mouth. Start with the upper lip and run your tongue back along the roof of the mouth. How far back can you go? Comment. The uvula is probably as far back as can be seen in the mirror. The larynx and vocal tract are inside the body and cannot be seen or felt with the tongue. The articulators that can be felt with the tongue vary from person to person. Most people will be able to use the tongue tip to feel the lips, teeth, alveolar ridge, and hard palate. Depending on the flexibility of the tongue, you may also be able to feel the velum. The uvula cannot usually be reached by the tongue and is responsible for our gag reflex. For example, if it is touched by the toothbrush. 3.3.1 Active and passive articulators. As we have said previously, when we produce consonants, we constrict air, which is usually flowing up from the lungs. To form a constriction, we use two articulators in the majority of cases. Only one articulator moves, and this is called the active articulator. The articulator that it moves towards is called the passive articulator. In the example that we have looked at already, we can identify active and passive articulators. In ma, the active articulator is the bottom lip because it moves, whereas the passive articulator is the top lip, which the bottom lip moves towards. For the active articulator, the tip of the tongue, and the passive is the articulator is the alveolar ridge. Exercise 3.3. Think about the sounds at the start of the word below. Remember to isolate them from the rest of the word. Say them slowly and then try to work out which is the active and passive articulator for each one. As with the previous exercise, it may help to look in the mirror. Car, tank, van, lorry, bike. Comment. It is worth noting that this is quite a different exercise to do. We are not used to thinking about how we speak or introspecting about our own vocal organs. However, this will get easier with practice. Have a look at the answer below and then go back to the exercise to see if you can relate the answer to your own articulation. The ka in the car is formed by the back of the tongue, active, moving towards the velum, passive. The tank in tank, the L is and L in lorry are both formed in the same place of the with the active tongue tip and the passive alveolar ridge. V, v in van is formed when the bottom lip approaches the top teeth, and bike is formed in the same place as ma when the bottom lip approaches the top one. Places of articulation. 3.4. Now that we know which articulators are involved in producing sounds, we have another set of labels to learn. As mentioned above, when we refer to the place of articulation of consonants, we are describing the place in the vocal tract where there is the most constriction of your flow. The place of articulation is normally named after the passive articulator. So a sound formed with the tip of the tongue approaching the alveolar ridge is saying to have an alveolar place of articulation. The, la. For example, all have the alveolar ridge as the passive articulators, so are said to have an alveolar place of articulation. Below are the names of the places of articulation that are used for consonants in SSPE. They are ordered from the front of the vocal tract towards the back. BOA, bilabial, active articulators bottom lip, passive articulator top lip. BOA, labiodental, active articulator bottom lip, passive articulator top teeth. BOA, dental, active articulator tongue tip, passive articulator upper front teeth. BOA, alveolar, active articulator tongue tip, passive articulator alveolar ridge. BOA, postal velar, active articulator tongue tip or blade, passive articulator region behind the alveolar ridge. BOA, palatal, active articulator tongue front, passive articulator hard palate. BOA, velar, active articulator tongue back, passive articulator velum. BOA, glottal, active articulator vocal folds, passive articulator none. The vocal folds move towards each other. Exercise 3.4. The sounds below are all formed at different places of articulation. First of all, identify its sound from its symbol and produce it between vowel sounds. Example: f, ha. Then try to work out which sound is produced at which place of articulation. H, b, v, f, j, g, t, n. Comment. Again, this is quite a difficult exercise to complete as we are not used to thinking about the position of our articulators. Look at the answers below and then return to the exercise to see if you can understand why the answers are as they are. H is a glottal, which is why you cannot feel any constriction in the vocal tract above the larynx. P and V are fairly easy, identified as bilabial and labiodental, respectively, especially if you are using mirror. Sh is postovelar and J is palatal, G is velar and T is dental, and N is alveolar. Below is a list of all the consonants of SSBE, with one exception ordered by the BOA, extending from the front of to the back of the vocal tract. Bilabial B, B, M, labiodental F, F, dental T, Sh, alveolar D, D, N, Sh, J, L, postvelar Sh, J, Ch, J, R, palatal J, velar K, G, Ng, glottal H. V, a special case. You might have noticed that V does not appear in the list above. This is because, unlike the other consonants listed, V has two equally important places of articulation. If you look in the mirror or at someone else saying V, you will definitely see some lip movement, which you might think would make the place of articulation bilabial. However, we know from the techniques like ultrasound, which allows us to see inside the mouth during speech, the tongue also moves when we produce V. The tongue moves in such a way that air is constricted between the back of the tongue and the velum. Importantly, the constrictions at the lips at the velum are equal in degree. If we took one away, the sound would no longer be V. So we say that V has a labial velar place of articulation. V is an example of a double articulation because it is produced with equal constriction of airflow at two places in the vocal tract. Exercise 3.5. Work your way through the list of SSBE sounds above, putting its consonants between vowels. Concentrate on your articulators and see if you are convinced that the POA is as given above. Comment. In general, consonants do not vary a great deal between speakers or even different accents of English. We will return to accents in later units, but for now, you should check any difficulties with a teacher if possible. There are also a couple of other English sounds you need to know about that we have not yet covered. Exercise 3.4.2. Other English consonants. Sounds. These sounds have not yet been covered for two reasons. Firstly, neither sound makes a meaning differences in the English language, that is, it occurs as a version of other sounds without affecting a word meaning. And secondly, especially for the second sound, they are not used by all speakers. We will return to these sounds in future units too, where their ideas will become clearer. The first sound we need to think about is often referred to as a glottal stop, which is symbolized as question mark in the IPA. The sound is very common in English and tends to occur as a version of the in certain environments, depending on a person's accent. In some accents of English, glottal can occur as a version of the, only at the ends of words. For example, many speakers of SSPE might pronounce cat as k and vowel ka, cat. For the accents of English, glottal can occur in the middle of the words. Speakers of Cockney and Glaswegian English, for example, might pronounce water as water with a final r for Glaswegian. Water for Glaswegian, as it is a rhotic accent, but this pronunciation would be unlikely for an RP speaker. When a speaker uses glottal, it is sometimes said that they are dropping their T's. In reality, they are just using another version of the. The has not been deleted but pronounced in a different way as a glottal stop. Thus, a term for this phenomenon is glottal replacement or glottaling. The place of articulations for glottal is glottal. As the name glottal stop suggests, so the major constriction of air when these sounds is produced is made by the vocal folds. The second part of the name stop means that the air is restricted completely. We will return to this idea in the next unit on manners of articulations, as the vocal folds are pressed tightly together for the glottal stop. They are not able to vibrate at the same time, so this sound is voiceless. Another sound that is important to know about is v. This sound has a labiodental place of articulation, as the air is constricted most by the bottom lip approaching the top teeth. V, v, v is often referred to as labiodental. R, because Some speakers of English use "r" as a version of "r". For example, at the start of the words like rabbit and rhubarb, most speakers produce "r" by constricting the air between the tip of the tongue and the postvelar region, which is why we have described "r" as postvelar above. If we want to symbolize this precise articulation, we can use "r", but an increasing number of speakers are starting to use "r" in place where other speakers are using "r". "R" may well be familiar to you. People quite often notice if speakers use this sound as a version of "r" and might describe the phenomenon as not being able to say your "r's". For example, some celebrities such as Jonathan Ross, Paul Martin, and Elodie use "r" for "r". However, note that "r" is not the same as "v", which has labial velar POA. This is confusion that has been perpetuated in the media. For example, Jonathan Ross calls himself Washi on Twitter, presumably because W is the closest way to represent the sound of a labiodental R using spelling. Labiodental R has been in the English letter for hundreds of years. However, over the last 30 years or so, more and more speakers have started to use it. Its use does not seem to be related to any particular accents, but does tend to be related to age. To be related to age, with more younger speakers favoring it. I use the labiodental R when I speak, and generally find that about 10 to 15% of my students do too. Exercise 3.6. In this exercise, you will concentrate on your own speech to work out what type of R you use and when you use glottal stops. A. First of all, try the familiar tongue twister, round and round, the rugged, rock, the ragged, rascal run. As you can see, there are lots of r's in this sentence. Your job is to think about which articulators you are using to constrict the air when you produce your r sounds. Are you using your bottom lip to approach your top teeth and therefore using r, or is the tip or back of your tongue approaching the roof of your mouth behind your alveolar ridge to produce r? You can look in the mirror if this helps. You can also make a very long extended r sound at the start of these words. Now think about where would you use a glottal stop. It is extremely unlikely that you do not use any at all. Does it sound okay for you to use a glottal stop at the end of words like hit and mit? In phrases such as she hit Sarah and she met Sarah, with about in the middle of words like butter or little. Comment: for the r sound, be careful not to confuse lip rounding with labiodental place of articulation. Many speakers who produce r as ver using their tongue and the post-velar place of articulations also protrude their lips slightly during the sound. For speakers who use labiodental ver, the lip shape looks rather different and more like that for v and f, as only the bottom lip moves and it approaches the top teeth rather than protruding. The likelihood is that you will use glottal stop at least some of the time. When you use them can depend on your accent and age, who you are talking to, and even the situation you are in. So it is possible that you might use scroll stops in the middle of words on some occasions and not others. Keep this in mind and listen to yourself and others for the next few days to see how many you hear. One final comment is that it is absolutely fine to use any of the variants we have discussed. Variation is one of the most interesting aspects of the study of phonetics, and it is certainly not the case that some variants are correct and others are wrong. Have a listen to the speech of people around you and on TV and on radio. And think about the types of variation you observe. We will return to types of variation and reasons for variation in Unit 14. Brackets. You know by now that spelling is enclosed in angled bracket and that speech sounds are shown in slash brackets such as b or the. However, you will also have noticed that question mark, r and v are shown in square brackets. Both slash and square brackets mean that we are referring to sounds rather than letters, and that we are giving a transcription rather than using spelling. The difference between slash and square brackets also gives us some extra information. However, we will cover this in more detail in later units, but we'll address it briefly now. When we put a sound in slash brackets, we are indicating that the sound makes a meaningful difference in the language. We can determine that it makes a meaningful difference by swapping it for another sound. For example, if we take the word lit and change the "the" for a "p", we get the word lip. The word means something different and indicates that "p" and "the" make a meaning difference in English. However, if we swap "the" and "lit" for glottal, we can hear the difference in sound, but there is no meaning difference. Likewise, swapping r for r, for example, in the rows, will make meaning difference even though you can hear a difference in articulations and sound. So if we are only transcribing meaningful sound, we use slash brackets. However, if we want to be more precise about the way the sounds are produced, we can use square brackets. For example, we can say that r can be produced as either r for r. So in simple terms, meaningful sounds go in slash brackets and variants of sounds go in square brackets. Do not worry if this distinction is confusion at the moment, as we will go into much more detail later on, particularly in Unit 9 and 13. The importance of place of articulations. The term for place of articulations are important as they are let us describe and compare different types of sounds. That is partly when we did above when we talked about whether people use a postal vowel or a labiodental place of articulations when they produce r. For example, we can make the same kind of comparison when we talk about the speech of children. All the speech that speech and language therapists here in the clinic. Exercise 3.7. Here are some transcriptions of speech produced by the Katie who is 3 years old. Orthography, cap, Katie, the vowel p, cap, meg, Katie, me vowel the, ring, Katie, r vowel n. First of all, write in the transcriptions of the adult pronunciations. Assumption SSB and using ver for the vowels. Then compare the adult pronunciation to Katie's pronunciation. Can you find a pattern that describes the difference between Katie's pronunciation and those of an adult? Thinking about the pattern you have identified, how would Katie pronounce king? Comment. For SSBE, adults cape has K vowel P, make is M vowel K, ring is ring vowel Ng, and B and C, where the adults uses a velar, Katie uses an alveolar. This is a pattern called fronting, in which sounds are replaced with ones that have a place of articulations further towards the front of the mouth. It is common in young children. Until the age of around 3.5 years, Katie would likely produce king as the vowel n, fronting both the velar to an alveolar place of articulation. Thus, she may be difficult to understand as king and teen will be pronounced in the same way. Non-SSBE place of articulation. So far, we have concentrated on the place of articulations on consonant sounds of SSBE. This is not because SSBE is particularly exciting or special, but because it is the variety that all readers of this book will probably be familiar with, although English has consonants produced at quite a range of place of articulation. There are some other places of articulation that are not represented in standard Southern British English. Below are some examples of sounds taken from the Handbook of the International Phonetic Association, which gives phonetics illustrations for many languages. If you know a speaker of the language referred to, you could ask them to produce these words for you. Alveolo-palatal. Those sounds are produced with a constriction between the blade of the tongue and the alveolar ridge in the palatal region. Such sounds occurs in Swedish at the start of the word kajal, meaning skirt. For example, they are symbolized as s and z. Retroflex. Retroflex sounds are produced with a constriction between the tongue tip and the portion of the roof of the mouth, where the alveolar ridge meets the hood palate. Retroflex sounds are different to alveolars or postvelars. However, in that the tip of the tongue is curled back so that underneath of the tongue from the constriction. These sounds are common in language of South Asian and are also one of the most noticeable features of Indian accent English. In Hindi, for example, the first sound in the words for postpone is the, and branch the are both retroflex. We have not yet introduced vowels, but the sound in these words is rather like the English vowel and car. Alveolar, evular, 3.7.3. Evular sounds are produced by forming a constriction between the back of the tongue and the uvula. You may be familiar with the r-like sound in French, studying the word "ro" meaning well, and some varieties of German studying the word "Rische" meaning race, which are produced with the evular place of articulation. These are lots of different evular sounds, symbolized, for example, k, g, r, k, g. Pharyngeal, 3.7.4. Pharyngeal sounds are produced by the constriction of air either between the walls of the pharynx or between the back of the tongue and the back wall of the pharynx. The sounds are found, for example, in Oriental Hebrew, such as in the middle of the word meher, meaning tomorrow, where is somewhat like the vowel sound in the English word cat. Summary: in this unit we have seen that consonants differ in place of articulations, which relates that to the place of maximum constriction in the vocal tract. We have also learned the names for the articulators. Looking forward in the next unit, we will see that the degree of airflow constriction is important for us. Our third and final consonant feature, manner of articulation, review questions. Have a look at this chapter, a discussion to see if you have understood the main points to be learned from this unit. How would you define place of articulations? What are all the places of articulations used in SSPE? What is the difference between a passive and an active articulators? Add POA to each of the place cards that you copied and started to fill it in the end of the last unit.